In this video, I'll share a new ethical framework, care ethics, which can give us another way to think about our moral responsibilities to other animals. I'll share a weak and a strong version of care ethics, and then I'll show how care ethicists make sense of the industrial farming of animals. We'll begin with the weaker version. Here, care ethics asserts that we should show moral concern and sympathy for other animals because they share many of the same biological needs and capabilities as humans. This includes the need for food, water, a clean environment or intact habitat, companionship and interaction with other members of one's own species, exercising behavior that's typical for that species, and capabilities such as sensation, movement, and emotion. Both humans and non-human animals share these basic needs and capabilities, do we not? Well, since we humans value meeting these needs, care ethicists say that we should also extend acts of care towards other animals to help them meet these similar needs. Basically, care ethicists assert a degree of moral responsibility to help non-human animals meet their basic needs, as well as to not prevent them from meeting their needs themselves. This moral responsibility to care for other animals arises when they have no other option to meet their needs by themselves, and if we're capable of helping them in that situation. After all, we might be tied up with an already existing obligation of care to someone else in our life. Here's an example. Let's imagine I come across a turtle trying to cross a rural road on which cars drive very fast. Let's say 70 miles per hour. Let's also pretend that I'm the father of a young daughter and I have a pet cat, but that currently neither of them need my help. Since my current obligations of care towards my daughter and cat aren't pressing at the moment, I can safely pull off to the side of the road and help the turtle cross. If my pre-existing obligations to care for my daughter and cat were pressing, then I would be excused to not help the turtle. Okay, now I'll share the strong version of care ethics as it relates to how we treat other animals. Here, care ethics says that we assume a moral obligation to animals when we enter a relationship of dependency. That is, when we humans act in a way that makes these animals dependent upon us for their survival, functioning, and well-being. In other words, this category of animals wouldn't be able to meet their basic needs and goods without our help and care. Think domesticated pets like cats or dogs, or domesticated farm animals like chickens, goats, and cows. Now, this next part is important. It must be our human actions that initially created the relationship of dependency. If the animals entered a relationship of dependency with us by their own actions, however, which is what ecologists call a parasitic relationship, then we don't have a moral responsibility to care for them. We could, and that might be very kind of us, but we're not morally responsible to care for them. And finally, note that the greater the degree that we have made other animals dependent upon us, the greater is our moral responsibility to care for them. So then, when it comes to domesticated farm animals, it's clear that the strong version of care ethics is what applies to them. This is because we have made farm animals dependent upon us for their survival and daily functioning through the historical process of domestication. In this historical process of domestication, we basically captured these animals from their previous habitat and held them at our human settlements and towns while selectively breeding the ones whose characteristics we wanted to encourage in the next generation. Gradually, these animals became entangled with our human lives, and they went from total independence from humans to a partial dependency on humans, as we have today. So this is just to say that humans initiated this relationship of dependency, and therefore, care ethicists would say that we have a moral responsibility to care for these farm animals. Of course, when we look at how most farm animals are being treated today, it's in the context of industrial animal farms, where they face acts that are akin to cruelty and torture. Hence, care ethics asserts a strong moral obligation to abolish factory farming, and it encourages citizens to refuse to purchase animal products from industrial factory farms. Further, care ethics asserts that we should advocate for the legal abolition of animal factory farms. Okay, so this leaves the question: does care ethics allow the consumption of animal products outside of industrial animal farms, such as unorganic farms? Or does it not? Is veganism required by care ethics? Well, as it turns out, most care ethicists don't rule against the use of animal products full stop. But instead, they say that animals raised by people should be treated in a caring manner. So, full veganism is not required. A follow-up question, then, is does care ethics permit the consumption of meat if the animal is treated with care throughout its life? Basically, if you treat the farm animal in a caring manner and it lives a great life up until its moment of slaughter for meat consumption, is this morally wrong for a care ethicist? What we're getting at here is care ethics may not promote veganism, but do they promote vegetarianism? Or not? Can you still eat meat on this account? And in order to answer this, we must explore a key question. Is slaughter itself a moral harm? You'll notice that the common overlapping feature between industrial animal farms and organic farms that raise animals for meat consumption is that slaughter remains part of the practice. A premature death remains part of the practice in either case. So, let's explore this question now. Is slaughter itself morally harmful? Can we call premature death a moral harm? Here are some responses that philosophers offer. Death can be called a moral harm because it entails the irreversible loss of future opportunities for finding pleasure, meaning, or pursuing one's subjective good. Put another way, death is seen as a harm in this view because it puts a final ending on any possibility of new opportunities for pleasure seeking or meaning making to arise. Death makes it so that it's no longer possible for these new opportunities to even come about. So in the context of industrial animal farms, a premature death through purposefully slaughtering the animal, even if it's done in as painless a way as possible, would still be a moral harm. If this account is true, then even organic animal farms would include this final harm of death. A care ethicist could argue that raising animals with the intention of slaughtering them, and at a younger age than they would otherwise likely live to, is an uncaring act. Okay, so that's one view that care ethicists might take on killing farm animals for meat consumption and this key question of whether a premature death through slaughter is a moral harm. However, a care ethicist could equally argue that if the farm animals are treated in a caring manner and lead fulfilling, happy lives up until the moment of slaughter, which could be unforeseen by them, quick, and made painless, then the harm of death is minuscule in comparison to the goods they achieved throughout life. On this view, death is still a moral harm, but it's small compared to the pleasurable and full life that these animals lived up until their slaughter. Therefore, this view says, farm animals belong on organic farms that treat these animals in a caring manner, not in industrial factory farms where they face acts of cruelty and torture. And there's further support for this view. Farm animals can help to compost food scraps, eating leftovers from the dinner table or the field, and turning this into nutrient-rich manure that can then be worked into the soil. Also, grassland ecosystems co-evolved with grazing animals, meaning that grasslands require some degree of grazing pressure to mow them back down. Regenerative grazing, or rotational grazing, is one method of moving dense herds of grazers, such as cows, from one small enclosure to the next, while allowing the mowed down grass in the previous enclosure to have a proper long rest period before the herd returns to that specific plot. Usually, this rest period is around 40 days. Having this rest period allows grassland plants to grow taller above surface in between grazings, and thereby put deeper roots into the soil beneath surface. And putting down deeper roots sequesters carbon from the atmosphere and puts it underground in the soil, while also creating habitat and food for soil microorganisms that are essential to the soil food web. So, let's take a step back and review. So far, we've looked at two views of care ethics on whether it's morally justified to consume animal meat. The first view argued that meat consumption isn't a relationship of care with these animals who are dependent upon us, while the second view argued that it's still possible to care for animals while slaughtering them for meat. Now, I want to put this in a fuller context. When animal rights activists and animal ethicists usually think about liberating animals from industrial farms, they often consider these four options. First, organic or regenerative farms. Second, farm sanctuaries. Third, releasing farm animals into the wild. And fourth, sterilizing these animals so that they cannot reproduce and will go extinct, and then caring for the currently alive generation of farm animals until they pass away of natural causes. We've already talked about what life might look like on organic or regenerative farms for these animals. Well, farm sanctuaries are spaces where farm animals can lead their lives as they typically do when they're not being restricted in any way, and there are still people around to assist in their care. In this setting, these animals are able to pursue their subjective good, are treated with care, and die of natural causes, rather than being prematurely slaughtered for meat. Thirdly, releasing farm animals into the wild, while not a commonly held position, would likely have disastrous effects on other ecosystems and the species living in them. Moreover, it's not certain that these farm animals could even survive on their own, and so this too could be argued an act of cruelty, since you're likely assuring their death. And lastly, it seems odd for an animal rights activist or animal ethicist to genuinely care about farm animals, to want their suffering to end, and also to disagree with the practice of slaughtering, and then to turn around and propose a solution of extinction. If slaughter is morally harmful, then extinction is a species-wide death, and this seems much more harmful. This would be treating one harm with an even greater harm. Indeed, extinction has been called a double death because both an individual member of the species dies and the entire species perishes, so that there's no possibility for any individual in that species to ever live again. In other words, the double death is that, say, both an individual cow and its entire species dies. The people who suggest this option usually do so because they see the relationship of dependency that farm animals have upon humans as necessitating exploitation. They think that this dependency will absolutely bring human domination over these animals. However, dependency does not equal exploitation. For example, a young child or a grandparent with dementia may be dependent upon our caregiving, but this does not justify our abusing them. And so the conclusion seems to be that it is not a caring act to let a species go extinct just because they cannot live without us. Indeed, you might find this preposterous. So, what do you think about care ethics as it relates to the proper ethical treatment of other animals? Do you like this ethical framework? And if you wish for an end to the suffering of farm animals under the industrial method, then which alternative do you find most compelling? The organic farms and the farm sanctuaries seem to be the two best options. The best we can do is to explore how we can create enabling conditions for farm animals to lead their best lives. Conditions which enrich both their and our lives through the relationships of care that are formed. We can form personal relationships to the animals that we raise. Of course, organic farms could still slaughter animals for meat consumption, and so you'll have to decide for yourself what you think about this ethical question of slaughter and a premature death.